What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 15 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast. Aaron Connick back with you alongside my host, Chris Smoke.
Hello,
Chris, how
sir.
we doing this week?
Doing very well.
And this, as always, is the show focused on gamers with jobs, families, and who have things to do in real life, Chris. So that's why we're here, right? We do real things.
That is, we're busy people, and we want to talk about video games, but we don't have time to really lag around. So what else we have to talk about?
We'll be jumping right in. So we got a great episode this week. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, I want to talk through a couple of items. Certainly, all of our media links that we plug every week. Follow us. Go to our website, businesscasualgamers.com. The single best way, and we've talked about it for several weeks, but if you've listened to this show for any length of time, you've liked what you've heard, you've come back week after week. We've had several listeners get in touch with us who have. We would love for you to review us on iTunes, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter. It's the single best way, frankly, to support the show and to keep getting the word out there to others. And
we appreciate it all.
Exactly. And that's why we do this. We certainly do this because we have fun putting together the shows and all the content for you. But certainly we want to expose that to as many people as possible. So we'd certainly appreciate if you take a minute to do that. Lots of content on YouTube, as you've seen. Hopefully, we've had some more retro reruns that have been a lot of fun lately. More great ones to come. So with that, we want to transition into our BCG discussion topic of the week. And this one's special because we've mentioned to our listeners on all of past episodes that we want to get feedback from you, the audience. What are the topics? What are the things that you want to hear us talk about? And today's topic was actually one that did come to us directly from a listener.
Indeed.
And he kind of came back at us. So we've talked about some different games, and we'll touch on a couple of them as examples as we've gone through game assignments and things that we've discussed on past episodes. But he wanted us to cover, well, what about the games that aren't really games, right?
Right.
And we'll touch on what that means, right? But it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's a video game. Right? It gets released for a console or a platform, and we play them with a controller and with all these interfaces that we're used to with our quote-unquote real games.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not quite what you'd consider your traditional video game. And there's so much, I feel, material to cover in this area. The one thing that I do have to say before we get into the discussion, and Chris and I talked about this a lot ahead of time, there is no way in my mind that we can have an honest conversation about these games in any kind of way that's both entertaining and useful to you, the listener, without really diving into what I'll call the spoiler zone.
Right.
There are going to be things that we talk about with all of these games that because of the bite-sized nature of some of these experiences, you almost, in some cases, may be giving away the whole game by discussing some of the things we're going to talk about. If that's not something you want to listen to, or if you hear a game and you say, I've always meant to go back and play that, I don't want to spoil, you're not going to hurt our feelings if you need to skip ahead. We're going to try and do our best to announce the games before we get into them to give you ample time to skip around as you need to. So please feel free to do that. But we do want to have an honest conversation of these games before we get into them.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the interesting parts about all this with respect to spoilers is that I can honestly say that at least a couple of the games that I want to talk about in this episode, while we will certainly get into specifically what happens in the game, and they are truly spoilers, I don't think that should dissuade anyone from actually playing the game again, because really the games that we're going to talk about are about the experience and not necessarily about what happens. You need to play it and experience it to really understand it. And even if you know what's going to happen, it's still worth the time, I think, to go through it. So
I totally agree. So with that, I want to start and kick us off in this topic by talking about the first experience that we've had getting a game, playing a game that we kind of stopped and said, is this really a video game? Mm-hmm. And for me, that game very easily was The Sims. Now, set the stage a little bit. I was a huge fan of the SimCity series.
Mm-hmm.
Really,
mm-hmm.
I love the world-building element to those games. Even though you kind of durdle a little bit and you're just you're putting stuff out there and waiting for people to populate the residential zones you put out there, there definitely felt like there was a tangible goal that I'm trying to get the biggest population possible. I want to use my space as efficiently as possible. I want to not run out of money, whatever it was. But I remember The Sims when it first came out, and it had this huge buzz around it. It was all the rage, and I bought this game. And I just kind of sat there at first. And I really just sat there like, so what do I do? You know, I just kind of had that
What's
feeling
the objective?
like, yeah,
how do you win?
Right. I was like, okay, is this just kind of the exposition? Am I supposed to, like, okay, once you get a certain amount of stuff built out in your house, does that start some kind of a quest or something? And I really just kind of found myself waiting for something to happen, and then inevitably go online, start reading about the game, and just kind of had that aha moment that, no, this is the game. Like, this is it.
This is it. This is
real
the experience.
life. Like, you need to mow the lawn. Guess what? You just paid $50 to go mow the lawn and do it in virtual reality, but you don't get your allowance when you do it, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, it was. Yeah, The Sims was. I was in the same boat, right? I played a lot of SimCity games. SimCity 2000 was one of my favorite games. I put way too many hours of my life into that game. And The Sims was something that it did. I know. A disclaimer. I know a lot of people love The Sims. And this is not to detract from any of their experiences, but you're right. For me, it was odd because I'd spend time doing things virtually that I could do outside of the world. Like I could go kick a ball, or I could go get furniture and move it around the house, and I could go take showers and things. It just,
right.
It's one of those things where I see people. I see why they enjoy it to some extent, but it got really old for me in many cases. And I played the first Sims, but that was like when, like 90s, late 90s, I think, early 2000s. I don't remember.
Been.
It was a long time ago, and since then there have been like a million iterations, right?
And I got into the game at a time where it'd been out for a while, and so it was probably not right on release. But I remember at the time, I don't think I was married at the time, but certainly had met my current wife and was dating her. And I just remember at the time when I play that game, you sit there and you're kind of building relationships with somebody in the game. And I was like, is this game just trying to guilt me out? Is it trying to tell me that I need to spend more time with my significant other? And this is just like the public service announcement game of, hey, go actually have a real spouse and have kids and enjoy life. And like, this is what you should be doing to be a productive member of society. I didn't know if there was some subliminal messaging to the Sims.
It was trying to tell you really need to slowly caress your wife's face and blow on her face. That's really what we learned from video games and how to deal with these kinds of relationships.
This is where all the waifu content that we talk week after week. I'm starting to actually make a connection here that it really is all the Sims' fault.
Yeah. By the way, all the people who love The Sims are shaking their fists at us right now. But, no, I can see why people enjoy it, but it's certainly all the simulator games, right? Even to some extent SimCity, and to some extent like Civilization. Right. Less arguably Civilization, but like Sim Ant. Who remembers Sim Ant? I mean, that game was like you're an ant.
Yeah.
It's like
pretty boring.
What are you going to go collect these little puff balls of food and stuff and move them around? I mean, that's kind of interesting. But I think that time, it's some of the experience, some of the, as best as these experiences could kind of encompass you or kind of bring you into the world, is kind of their draw in many cases. But I think that these types of, we'll call them non-game games or whatever we want to call them, these types of games are still they're still valid in many ways. They don't really necessarily have a story. They just have a something that we can do that gives us the flexibility, perhaps, to do things we couldn't normally do, like buy a big car or buy all this furniture or rearrange things crazily, put crazy wallpaper on. Go like find another significant other that you have you would never have the chance to be with or date or whatever in real life. I mean, I think those kinds of things are probably some of the draws of this kind of a game, I would think. If I think about why I play SimCity or something like that, I mean, I want to see a city grow and I want to have a sense of accomplishment, and I think that's part of in the Sims case, I guess it's that level of accomplishment as well as you would get building this entire Sim or many Sims lives, into something much more than it was before.
Well, I think you touched on a good point here, because one of the things that I feel like if you're going to go through, okay, if it's not a quote unquote game, right, there's no twitchy mechanics in many cases. There may not be a very compelling story, but it is a form of escapism. And
it is.
And I think that one of the assignments that we had for those of you who've listened to the show for a while, I assigned Chris well, I don't even want to call it a classic, but the title Papers, Please. And Papers, Please is really, much like Sim Ant, one of the most mundane exercises that you could ever hope to undergo, which is to serve as an immigration officer, basically cross-referencing paperwork. And I kind of assigned it to you saying, I can't really make a pitch for this game. and not expect some level of kind of, eye rolling or saying, really, is this like people made that game? What else is there? And you really just say, no, you go to work, you get paid meager wages that can barely heat your Russian home, and all you get to do is go to work and bang through as many immigration papers as you can and hope you don't get it wrong or your pay gets docked.
Yeah, this is probably speaks more to societal issues or like things that are engendered in me and being in this society. But to me, it was really fun, and I don't know why. I mean, there's a little bit of an underpinned story about this guy's giving you these weird encoded messages and asking you to like help people attack your country, and you don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, but you still want to kind of move along with that. There's that's interesting, but even then, I felt an odd sense. I was oddly compelled to make sure I did something right, make sure I didn't miss anything, and when I did miss something, I was like, one more person, because I should have caught that date of birth was just wrong. I should have caught it or whatever. And it's kind of like Civilization 5 or any Civ game. It's like one more turn, just one more person. And it was really interesting, but there was nothing to the game, right? There's nothing to it.
I'm kind of with you. I got in the zone, and it was very much. I think we're both naturally very competitive people. Once you start getting into, okay, this is what I need to do. This is my system. I'm going to go through this. And when I caught somebody, for me, the way I kept it, lively and fresh was I would do the Dikembe Mutombo finger wave when I would correctly bounce somebody out of the country and not let them across the line. You just had to get that sense of enjoyment that in my day-to-day job, there's no way that I could just kind of like bounce people out of line and start talking trash to them as though like, you're not getting in like, this is my house, you're not getting into my country. You can't do that, and you can't do it with the kind of bravado that that you do sitting on the other side of a screen. So I'm with you. Like, I would never. You're not going to see my job application to be an immigration officer anytime soon. But I do think there was a sense of escapism that I don't get to do this stuff every day, so it's kind of fun. And I wouldn't want to. I'm not going to play this game a year from now. But to have that experience and to kind of get in the zone for an afternoon. It was a $10 purchase. That's all I wanted out of the game, and I got exactly that. I got a fun experience that years later I can still talk about and smile about.
Yeah, they're very simple, and albeit even despite them being simple, they're intellectual tasks. And I feel like, and it's funny because when I see pictures of like PAXs and of big games conferences, inevitably there is that. Aristroika or whatever it was, there is that, someone has created that booth out of cardboard and they're trying to like look at people's papers and stuff. And I see that and I'm like, wow, that's awesome. I get that reference. And you actually played the game too?
Exactly. People played this?
But it was cool. I think I do think it plays on some sort. And someone, if there's a psychologist or someone who has studied the human brain and the mind here, there is some sort of I guess draw, like, I don't know, some sort of draw that you have by playing this game that just keeps you going, keeps you playing, and it might just be, maybe it's my own sense of competitiveness that I really want to not get it wrong, and I also want to know what's going to happen, and granted I never actually finished the game, I'm ashamed to say. But I know at the end of the game, like, something will happen. Either I'm going to die randomly, or or something awful will happen. I'm sure.
There's lots of different endings, and to me, you would have to kind of practice it and really kind of get in the zone with that game to get to the point where you could get all the way through without making mistakes. It's tough. I mean, it is very mechanically difficult once you get further in the game, even though it does repeat itself. But it was a game where if you liked it enough, you could replay it. Now, let me transition that to a different kind of game, which is what I'll call the one-hit wonder, where you mentioned earlier, there are certain games out there where once you play it, you really can't have that experience again in the same way. It's kind of like once you see it, you have that moment, you get that feel good, and then you're ready to move on, and you can never quite experience it the same way again. You may have some fun showing it to a friend and seeing their enjoyment, but a game that I'll call out specifically was a game called Frog Fractions. It was a web-based game that, frankly, you can play through hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe. Yeah. Most of the time spent, or most of the variation between how much time you'll spend with the game is how quickly you figure out the initial, I'll call it, puzzle. So to kind of set the stage, and again, I'll spoil this, but to me, if you haven't played this game, stop what you're doing, spend the next hour and a half playing that game, come back and listen to us. but basically, you're sitting there, and it looks like, a 5-year-old math game almost.
Yeah, it really
and you're
looks bad.
sitting there, and it's kind of like a shooter where you're going and you're slurping up these bugs. And you're kind of sitting there like it's showing a score on screen. That's how many you've slurped up. And the numbering system kind of gets exponentially bigger and you're not quite sure what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally it clicks. And you're kind of sitting there like you've been doing it a little long. You're not really having fun anymore. And you're wondering where you're supposed to go.
Yeah, do I keep doing this? Right.
Yeah. And so then you start pressing the directional keys. And I'm very curious like how this works. I'm sure they have observed many people playing this and they kind of have that aha moment. But you press down far enough and your guy dives beneath the sea and you see this pile of bugs at the bottom of the ocean that have just piled there that you've been like knocking out of air. And you go to the bottom and it swallows like 1 billion flies. And then finally you sprout wings and you fly. And so then you realize like, okay, this game is just completely out there. I need to get in that frame of mind. Like this isn't going to be your normal game. And basically what the game does is it takes you through, I'll call it a best of video game tropes. And it takes you through text-based adventures that are hilarious. It takes you through my personal favorite, the Dance Dance Revolution clone. That is absolutely the part of the game where I kind of gave them the slow clap of just like, you did it. You hit me right in the sweet spot. You've touched my heart in a way that I will never forget this game. And at the end of it, all you haven't really done anything other than to have a few laughs and to kind of have your mind blown a little bit of like, I can't believe somebody would actually make this game.
Yeah, I remember playing it and I was so taken aback by it. I think you had, it's probably about a year or two ago, you had given it to me. You said, hey, you should play this. And, before we were even doing this show, Aaron was giving me assignments and I was giving him, and I remember playing it and I was like, I think Aaron's lost it. I really do. Like, this is just
this is horrible.
He usually gives me he hooks me up with some good game recommendations, and I don't know what was going on when he thought about this thing, but this is awful. And then I went through that, then I uncovered the rest of the real interactive game, whatever, and that he described, and it was really kind of cool. It was hilarious to see, and I really I say that it looked awful in the beginning, not to disparage the people who built it, but it's just hilarious. Like, it was built specifically to look like this.
Absolutely.
To look like that Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing or whatever it was, kind of a game from like the 1994 or whatever, 92, something like that. And it was hilarious to see. And those kinds of things are really, really good examples of this kind of a game that's not really a game. I mean, there's no winning, there's no losing, there's no story. It's just, hey, we're gonna pelt you with a whole bunch of funny things that I hope you get all the references and you'll be really excited about it. Kind of like way back when we talked about the RP, Act Like a Hero, the RPG simulator stuff.
Another
that we played.
great example.
Those are really, really cool types of things that just people just doing some tongue-in-cheek, really hilarious kinds of interpretations of games, I think.
And I know, that's an example of a free game, but it's one where when I look at the market of games today, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a bit, but that's a game that we both played, we told other people about, they played, we completed the whole game, and I feel like there is absolutely a niche that these kind of games can go out there, survive, get a cult following, and have years and years of longevity after you've moved on to the next console generation, after you've moved on to the next graphical upgrade. And I think that's something very unique about the genre that we're finally seeing. Now, I want to
wait, one second. What you're saying now is that we want to have a PSVR Papers, Please.
I think that could be,
we need to experience it. If anyone knows the developer, I'm gonna have to go email them, right? Yeah. We need to have this. I mean, we need to have this experience.
Several days through, you get the X-ray machine, right?
Yeah,
what better than to actually get the 3D, you are looking at the, you're picking it up, you're holding it. I'm feeling it, Chris.
This is why Sony and everyone else created VR. In fact, they they're hoping secretly that Papers, Please will come to their cherished platform.
Can you imagine like holding up? You could couple it with the now defunct PS Move, and you could use it as like the stamp on the papers.
They're bringing it back. You know, PS Move is part of VR here, so it's done.
But how awesome would that be? Get double Move controllers and then stamp the table and have it stamp the pass. Okay, this is a thing, Chris.
This is seriously. I think we're gonna have to do this. That's good. We made it now. Okay, sorry to interrupt. I completely derailed the conversation, but I think that was totally worth it.
I think it was worth it. Now, Sony is probably not going to have the guts to see our vision, take us up on the Papers, Please upgrade. The game that I think that they pioneered that really did find a wide audience was a game called Journey. Now, Chris, I don't know if you remember Journey.
I don't remember this game.
Okay, so Journey was an interesting game. And this is, I'll call it going up the next rung of the ladder where you're starting to get a little bit more of a quote-unquote game. But I think what characterized this game for me that puts it in this category that's worth discussion is, one, the length of the game. I think it's a very short game. It's a little bit longer than Frog Fractions, but I do remember sitting down in a single playthrough, single afternoon, and beating this game start to finish. And what was very interesting about this game, if I had to call it anything, I'd call it a platformer, kind of a 3D platformer. Not hard. I mean, you're basically, it's set up in a way where I don't care what skill level you have with platformers, you're going to complete this game if you sit down and you play to the end. But what was very interesting about it is that there were no words spoken throughout the game. And you were basically on a journey through life. It's kind of told through metaphors. And you were kind of out in the desert and you were starting. And it was cool because it paired you. It didn't have to be played co-op, but it would pair you with random people online. It would tell you, who that person was. And you'd go through a screen with them. And then oftentimes, after you'd kind of complete that screen, it would switch you up and you'd lose that person. You'd get paired with somebody else. So it's kind of like this metaphor of you're taking life, you're going through this journey of life with different people. And at certain times, at certain stages, you have this person who's important to you. And at the next level, you have this person. And it was one of these games where I can't really do justice to the ending, but it has this really, I'll call it magical ending where it just really kind of, it stops you cold in your tracks, and it just really kind of sat and made me think for a couple minutes. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember after finishing it for the first time, I heard people who went back and played through it again, and I was really thinking I was going to go back and play this game again, but part of it, I just said to myself, I'm like, I think I've kind of gotten out of this game what the game wanted me to get, where I understood the metaphor. I had this cool experience that I don't know that I could replicate again. And I can't even remember. It was a $10 or a $15 PSN exclusive. But I remember that game because I maybe got 3 hours out of it, but I still remember it. Mm-hmm. Unlike many of the other games, when we've all played the big budget games over the years, that game, I played it for 3 hours, and years later, I've never played it again, but I still think about that game.
Yeah, and I think that's really the power. So we've talked up until this Journey game. We talked a little bit about these non-game games that are just kind of just experiences, but don't really have a lot of story necessarily. But this is a good transition, I think, Aaron, and some of the games that I'd like to talk about as well that speak to the same point. And so for as a quick example, the two games I want to talk about. I want to mention ahead of time these are spoilers, so please, if you're listening and you don't want to hear anything about these games, they're extremely good games. I don't think it's gonna, by saying something, it's gonna really dilute the experience if you go through and play them again. But fast forward about 15 minutes or so, and hopefully we'll be done with it. But the two games I want to talk about are 3/4 Home and then Gone Home.
Yeah.
These are games that let's take 3/4 Home for example, and I talked about this already on the podcast, and I gave the kind of the spoiler-free review of it and my recommendation. These are two games that are so, I guess, strongly coupled with emotion and strongly coupled with the evocation of emotion in the player, that it is such it's storytelling unlike I'd ever seen, really, and that's really representative and primarily Gone Home, which I'll go into in a minute here. But 3/4 Home is a game, but it's not really a game. It's about an hour long. And again, there are going to be spoilers here. So we talked about in the very beginning. The game starts. You're a girl who's home from college, and you're in a car in, I think, Oklahoma or something like that, and you're driving home in a thunderstorm. And in doing so, all you see basically on the screen is a silhouette of the car with the lights, and you see heavy rain. And what I think is a very interesting story point, you push the right key or whatever, and the car starts driving and speeds up a little bit. When you let go, it slows down, and the actual time slows down with it. So it kind of helps. It's a cool little effect that kind of helps underscore the fact that there's this weird time space kind of thing, not in any sort of paranormal sense, but you are controlling the rate at which this game the story continues to unfold. Anyway, so the character calls her parents, and she starts having normal conversations with her mother, her father, and her brother. And at every point, you can choose how to react.
Okay.
So if you're like a college student, you know that some of the reactions are, yeah, mom, whatever, don't care, whatever. It's kind of mean reactions. There's some more nice reactions. And based on how you choose to take that conversation, you can expect certain things would happen. Like the mother will get mad at you, the dad will pick up, or vice versa. Or you'll talk to your brother who will read you a story that he's written about you. All the while, storms are going on in the background. And periodically you hear things like, you know, the dad comes in and says, oh, there's a bad storm coming our way, and honey, you need to make it home really quickly. It's really bad. We're going to go into the basement. There's a tornado coming, blah, blah, blah. Moral of the story is you're in the middle of this conversation, and you're talking about things, and you're talking to your mom or whoever it was, and blah, 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 blah. And I think, depending on how you go through the story, you might actually be in a point of negativity with your parents. You're kind of frustrated. You're screaming at your mom a little bit. Your dad's kind of upset, and all of a sudden the line goes dead. And right before that, they were talking about storms, tornado, blah, 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 blah. And then, so the implication here is your family just got wiped out by a tornado in the middle of this entire thing. And here you are. Like, it underscores the overall, like, how you interact with your family. You're like, oh my God, I was just sitting here talking to them through the last moments of their lives. I didn't even know it was coming. They didn't know it was coming. And what I was talking about was so stupid. I was upset at them. They were upset at me. We were bickering about stupid stuff. And this is how it ended. And that's kind of like one of those moments where you stop and you're like, oh my God, this is crazy to have this kind of experience.
Yeah,
in a
what
game.
am I doing with my life? What do I need to stop, and what conversation do I need to go have right now?
Right, and in a game, because it's funny because you start playing this game and you're like, okay, I'm just pushing right, and it's not that really big of a deal, and it's an hour game. Like inside of 45 minutes or an hour, you can go through all the choices. But you realize, like, oh my gosh, like all this stuff really leads up to something. There's really a lot of subtext that you don't really understand, and it really underscores like your like how you interact with people and who you need to go talk to and all that kind of stuff. And then at the very end of the game, if you get the I have the Vita version, I think that came out with more stuff. They actually have some interactions with the same girl that occurred weeks prior, I think. Talking about, some of her troubles and things at college, and her getting a job and getting fired from a job, talking to her mom. Little small little discussions here and there that really don't mean a lot. But in the context of knowing what's going to happen in the future after playing that particular section, you're like, wow, this is the kind of stuff that, although it's really just mundane, stupid talk, it's really what makes life great, and what makes the family situation great, and really makes you appreciate your friends and all that. So that game really hit me as such an interesting component of video game and storytelling, because it was so evocative of emotion, and it's like an hour long, and it's not really a game. Like, there's nothing to beat. You push right, and you stop pushing right, and you click on something that tells you what answer you want or whatever, and the story unfolds. So it's kind of like one of those choose your own adventure things.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've thought about as we were kind of reflecting on this topic is that even though I'm not trying to knock TV or movies or whatnot, or books for that matter, as a medium, as somebody who has grown up playing video games his whole life, and I know, Chris, you're the same way.
Right.
There is something about holding a controller and having something, where you, even if it's a very minimal level of interaction in terms of what the input needed from me is, I do find that I am more open to experience story and that really connect with something when I have a controller in my hand. And it's part of that's just so many of the great stories that I look back on and really value are video game stories, and that it's a medium that I've grown up with. I enjoy that. when, even if it's the story, even if somebody were to sit down and say, okay, the story I want to tell is I want to make the point that the minute-to-minute conversations and interactions you have with people in your life, you never know what can happen, make the most out of it. If you were to sit down and say, I don't know, this is the story I want to tell, but what's the best medium to tell it? If somebody were to sit in front of me, I'd say, well, if you make a game out of it, quote unquote,
right.
If you put a controller in my hand and make me interact with it and give me some feel that I have some kind of ownership of this character, of this story, instead of just making me passively hit the play button, sit back and watch, that makes me feel different emotionally than if it were a movie, TV, or reading a book, where I just feel like I'm hearing about somebody else's story.
Yeah, and I haven't gone through, to be frank, and actually, or I guess to be transparent, I haven't gone through and looked at all of the other options, because there are options where I think you can have good relationships by the end of the game, or you're not in this negative point. But for me, I was at this point where I was being a little snarky because I thought it'd be funny, and at the end when all this stuff ends, I'm like, oh my god, that's just like, actually, it was really important to see that. Quite frankly, for me, it really underscored the story of that particular game. Now, the next game I want to talk about is Gone Home, which is a game that came out years ago. I actually didn't play it up until a couple weeks ago. I tweeted about it when I finished the game. This is another example of an extremely well-told story that really it conveys things I've never seen before in a very specific way. So here's the story. And again, these are spoilers. So a girl comes home after spending a year overseas. She has a family who is a mother, father, and a daughter, and two daughters actually. So she has a sister. Her sister's younger. Sister's still living in the house, going through high school and things like that. And so you get home. You see a note on the door as you walk in that says something to the effect of, your sister's gone, don't try and look, or, sister's writing to you is the main character, that she's leaving, don't try and find her, don't tell mom and dad. You go inside the room or the house, and the mom and dad are gone, you don't know where they are, you don't know anything about it, and so you start slowly uncovering, through exploring these rooms, you slowly uncover certain things, like little pieces of evidence, little scraps of paper, and you start reading the paper, you start piecing together these people's lives. And what you end up finding is, you find things like, the mother is having some weird, kind of an affair with some people at work, the mother and father aren't doing very well in their relationship, but the most overarching story is of the sister. And so the sister starts talking about, you find these little pieces of diary, you go into her room and you start looking at things, and you start realizing, this is back in the 1990s, by the way, you start realizing that the sister gets a good friend of hers that she meets in class, and they start hanging out, they really like all the same music, they really hit it off, and you follow it through this storyline of, it's maybe an hour and a half, 2-hour game, depending on how quickly you run it, and you start realizing this relationship is growing and growing and growing, and the sister starts talking so much about how important it is to have this person in their lives and what's going to happen, and then you start realizing that there's more than just a friendship there, and that they're starting to to fall in love with each other, and it's this weird thing because back then gay rights and stuff were much I guess
it's more taboo, certainly.
More taboo back then, and they start painting the picture that the family was very, very against it. And so really what's so interesting about this is it goes to this entire story of this sister telling through these artifacts the bigger sister is catching, the character you're playing, is the agony that these two girls and young women went through as they realized that they were attracted to one another, and they loved each other, and they wanted to be with each other, and how their families completely shunned them for it. And eventually it got to the point where one of the girlfriend was shipped out to army or something. She had to report for military service, and then they decided last minute that she's going to desert, and they're all going to go together and run away, and that's why the sister's gone. And that kind of story, as I tell it right now, is not super compelling, right? You're like, okay, it's any sort of story. It has an interesting hook, and it doesn't, it's not super compelling, and though you can see some of the intricacies of the story kind of weaving together. But to the real key of it, and this is why I say actually spoiling the game doesn't really matter. You go through and you listen to the way these things were told, and the voice acting was exceptional in this game. where they go through every point, and you can really feel all the story points, all the emotions
Right.
that the characters are going through every time. It's when they say how their heart really aches when this person is away, and they start realizing there's a relationship there that, that point, the way they convey it there is exceptionally good, unlike anything I've ever seen in a game. And then it's over in the end. You kind of just leave it where you hit present. You kind of caught yourself up to what happened and where you are, and that's where the game ends. It just fairly abruptly ends. Yeah. And that was, at the end of the game, it's one of those games like you just mentioned before, like, hey, at the end of the game, I just stopped and I sat there and thought, wow, that was just a crazy roller coaster. Because in the beginning, I expected as a gamer to come into this game, it's a deserted house, thunderstorm, it's raining at night, I'm gonna have some ghosts or whatever. And there are some things here or there that kind of indicate that the old owner was weird, and then the little sister has some notes about how they thought they were doing like little seances or whatever. They thought there were ghosts in the house.
Right.
And I thought, okay, cool, this is gonna turn into a ghost game or whatever.
Didn't know where it was going.
But no, it had nothing to do with that. All it had to do was the game was solely focused on trying to convey the point and the emotions of everything. So the issues that all the family were having, and conveying very, very, I guess, raw ways the pain and suffering the sister was feeling as she was being pulled between two worlds. And, you put that in the context of the 90s, and it really makes sense as someone who grew up in the 90s, in the teenage years. That was really compelling to me. I think the story is unlike anything I'd seen.
And the fact that we're still talking about it to this day is something that stands out to me about these. And I want to kind of take the topic in the next direction, which is to say, why, if we've talked about a number of games, and these are games that collectively, if you were to add up the play time to all of these, you probably wouldn't even get to a modern day game, right?
Right.
A AAA game that's 20 hours or it's no good, or 15 hours. But all of these games, years after, in some cases, that we've played them, have left an impact. And it kind of begs the question to me that if video games is such a powerful medium to, whether it's tell a really powerful story, have just a quick laugh like we talked about in Frog Fractions, or just have an interesting kind of, like you said, a choose your own adventure or an escapist experience of, may not be the most interesting task, but just the act of doing something that's outside your day-to-day life is something that's entertaining for a while. How do we get these games out there? Now, I know that you and we search for these types of games, right? We follow the industry. We hear about these types of things. We don't necessarily hear about them all, because certainly there are lots of indie games that are out there, and that the pace of development and release is only accelerating. But that being said, I feel like in all of these cases, there is clearly a market there, because of all the AAA games that get published every year, there is no way we can play them all. If you lined up every 15 to 20 hour plus game that comes out, I just do not have enough game hours in the year to possibly consume all of these. Mm-hmm. But if you stack together all the games we talked about today and said, hey, here's 6 or 7 great games that you probably ought to play at some point, over the course of the next year, I could absolutely fit in every single one of those alongside the games that I am playing. And from a money perspective, I wouldn't bat an eyelash paying 10, 15, 20 bucks for some of these games, knowing that it was going to be a very short experience. But if it left me with the kind of mark and the kind of thought-provoking experience that the games we've talked about have, I'd say that's time and money very, very well spent.
Yeah, and it's even more so than we talked about movies and how good, thought-provoking and emotion, raw emotion kind of conveying movies are good. But I think in this case, what makes these games more interesting is the fact that they're interactive. Like if you take the Gone Home story, as I mentioned, you put it in a book form, it will still be compelling, but not as much. If you put it in a movie form, it will still be compelling, but not as much, because I chose at every step of the way to go into this room in this order and to read this thing and to take each step in the process. And at every step in that process, I have enough time where I can stop and think about it. I have enough time to process things and all that, which doesn't necessarily happen. The pacing of a movie is really, really important. These kinds of games or experiences, it's very different. And in many cases, this is the heart of what we talk about when we think about just non-traditional forms of art and how art can be conveyed or stories can be conveyed in unique ways. What I call Gone Home and Three Chorus Home games, it depends on our definition. But in this case, I'm very glad they were made, and I'm really glad that I'm hoping that these developers will continue to make other similar games like this, because honestly, I can kind of tell you, after I loved Uncharted 4. I played the heck out of that game. I cannot tell you all the things happened in every step of the game, and I have some moments that I remember, but nothing do I remember more vividly than the Gone Home things. I can hear the voices in my head after listening to those clips and all of that, and I can see 3/4 Home in my head when I go to think about that game. And that's the kind of stuff, to your point, that really drives home the value and the ability of these games and this media to really tell a story and really provide a lasting impact to the player.
Yeah, and one of the things that I hope happens more, and I've mentioned it when we did our Sony retrospective, I think to get these types of games to the next level, you're really going to have buy-in from a major publisher to get these out there and say, this is just going to be part of our overall portfolio. This is not going to be the only thing we make, but we are going to put out and market exceptional games like this, knowing that we can't probably charge $60 for it.
Right.
Because if you look at Journey was something that got a big push from Sony. They said, this is going to be kind of one of our signature PSN releases. It sold relative to what you would normally expect from a PSN download-only game. Sold very well, got a lot of positive reviews, got a lot of buzz, got a lot of people playing it. And when I look at that game and say, how does that kind of fit into the larger Sony plan? That is something that will endear you to a console, right? Sony was the only one that had that game. And I look back on that and said, if they're going to deliver me the next Journey, this is a console that I want to own and I want to be a part of. I don't know what game it's going to be, don't know when it's going to happen, but if they're kind of putting their marketing and their horsepower behind these types of games, I'm in. And I look back at that as an example of how this could be done right. And it doesn't have to be something like a Frog Fractions where, it's kind of web-based and it's a labor of love and somebody puts it together and puts it out there for free. I think this can be a viable business model, even if it's something where you can't charge what they're looking to charge for the next Madden or Uncharted 4. I think this is something that, and we'll certainly touch on it more with some of our game assignments, I think there are companies that can commit that they are going to be the company that develops this type of experience. I know Quantic Dream, we've talked about it a little bit. I mean, they are, I would call it on the scale of games that aren't quite games but get sold as full-featured $60 games. I mean, you look at all of the releases they had with Heavy Rain was a huge game. That got a ton of push for PS3. I keep forgetting the upcoming one with the robot detective.
I can't recall the name.
That was featured in E3. Very cool looking game where just like you said, if you look at the trailer for it, shows a robot negotiating, doing a hostage negotiation with another one, and it was a really cool looking experience where you're choosing your own adventure.
Yeah, I think so. I guess to wrap this topic up, I think this is what's so cool about art in general, right? And not to make a stupid point, generic point on the thing, but art can be expressed in many different ways, and I think this is what we need to be able to encourage people to create games like Quantic Dream and other indie developers to help create these kinds of games. And if they do well, if we as I guess as a consumer or set of consumers really like it, then we can see bigger games like Gone Home that are 5, 6, 7 hours long, yet still have just as much impact in the long term. I certainly hope we see that. We can see, a Papers, Please that's something similar to that that's on a larger scale in some cases. I'd like to see that in the long term. But so I think that's a really cool, interesting topic. I hope you guys enjoyed that part. That's one of the things that we definitely want to poll the audience and let us know what you think about these games. Have you played any of them? And what did you think about them specifically? Did the ones that I mentioned, 3/4 Home and Gone Home, did they hit you as hard as they hit me? Were they as interesting? Or do you prefer more of the Papers, Please, Frog Fractions, similar games that are, as we call them, non-game games? How do you feel about that stuff? We're always open. Please hit us up on Twitter or YouTube or email us, whatever you need to do. So with that, I want to spend a couple minutes and talk about what we've been playing recently. In particular, I want to talk about a game that I just picked up last week that I thought was pretty interesting. It's right in my wheelhouse here. Everyone knows that I love Super Metroid. I love Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Metroidvania games are big for me. And Insomniac just delivered something last week that I think is worth talking about. And so the game is called Song of the Deep. I'll only spend a couple minutes on it here, but there are a couple things with this game that's really interesting. So the idea is you're a girl whose father is goes out and sails on the sea every night or every afternoon or whatever, and every day he comes back home until one day he doesn't. And so this girl gets really worried, and she builds a submarine and ventures into the sea to go figure out where her father is and find him. Very kind of a non-unique opening necessarily,
Sure.
but it's an interesting little story they go through. The cool part about this game is it is the graphics are really, really cool. It's really interesting to see how this game is kind of completed underwater. So the mechanics, everything, the game is beautiful. There's a lot of areas where you can explore. The story itself, as I mentioned, is okay. It's not super great here, but I think that overall the visual presentation of the game is really interesting. It makes it a very good game. Now, what I think I will say about it, though, and I know I definitely want Aaron to talk about it, and actually I want you to tell me if you want to play it. I think you should play the game.
Yeah.
Is there are some points that are very frustrating, and the controls are a little bit difficult to work with. Some of the mechanics are kind of interesting. But one of the things that kills me the most about this game, I'm not giving anything away as saying this, but there are some points where there aren't a lot of enemies along the way. There are some enemies that are there that are incredibly cheap, that just kill you in one hit, and it drives me absolutely nuts. But what really bothered me and made me really frustrated, and actually tarnished the overall experience of the game for me, was these gauntlets of enemies. So periodically, you'll just swim into one little area or move into one little area. It won't be obvious you're going into one. And, all of a sudden, gates close behind you and you can't go anywhere.
So you're in like an arena almost.
You're in like a little arena, and these like 4 pipes, and then all of a sudden, little enemies start coming out of different various things, and you start killing them, and more enemies come out, and you start realizing that there's a set way that they always introduce the same enemies at the same time in every gauntlet, and you keep repeating these gauntlets as you get closer to the end of the game, over and over and over again with harder and harder enemies, and it just felt like I feel like a cop-out to me, honestly.
Right.
Because you get to the point where you look at this and say, okay, well, I'm totally okay with you giving me harder enemies, and I'm totally okay with you doing this, but why stick me in this weird little gauntlet so often where I have to fight through it? And finally, I got really close to the end of the game, or so I think is the end of the game, and I got to this gauntlet. I'm like, guys, I'm just done with this stuff. And I turned it off, and I have not played it since.
It's interesting. So this is a formula, the Metroidvania formula that you mentioned, that for a long, long time, I pretty much was signed on for. Anytime a game like this was released, I was all in, and I was ready to go it again. The franchise that broke me was Castlevania, especially the DS and the GBA releases. I can't remember which one finally did me in, but it got to the point where I think probably on the 5th carbon copy of the exact same game with slightly different character names, mechanics, whatever, it felt so formulaic to me that I really had a hard time going back from that point. So this is a genre that I pick up much less often than I used to, only because I kind of had a little bit of my fill at the time. But it's interesting in that I'm kind of on the fence of whether this is one that I'd be into, given that there are so many good Metroidvania games. I mean, I could always just go back and play Super Metroid again.
That's true.
There's part of it that I always wonder, like, how much of it do I go back and play some of the originals versus the next thing that maybe isn't quite as good. So
let me go through and kind of smooth out my previous statement. So despite the fact that I'm frustrated and I stopped playing it, I will go back to the game. I think that there are cool things to actually go out and find. It is Metroidvania, so there are a lot of little secrets here and there to find. Overall, if I were to rate the game 1 out of 10, 10 being the best, I think it's probably a 7. I do think it's a good game. It's not a great game. The other redeeming factor is it's $15. And so I think if you want something fun to play that will keep you interested, I do think Song of the Deep is a game to play. I just wish that there are some components that would have been polished a little bit more. And I don't know if to me, it seems a little bit uncharacteristic of Insomniac to release a game that had some of these kinds of flaws in it.
Yeah.
I was expecting a little bit more, but if those little small things had been tweaked, I really think the game would be great. And there are some good puzzles. Don't get me wrong, there are puzzles in this game that You look at it, and actually one particular room in particular, I go to this room with all these lights, different colored lights, and I look at it and say, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be absolutely impossible. This is where I'm going to give up on this game."
Okay.
And I give it a couple minutes of effort, and I magically make it work, and it solves the puzzle, and I feel a real sense of accomplishment. I really loved it. There are other cases where you're constantly getting new techniques and new weapons and things you can use, new skills of sorts. And they don't necessarily explain to you how you can use them in non-traditional ways. So if you get, something that does X, it says X, this missile blows up rock. Okay, cool. But what they don't tell you is that missile could also do something else. No, I'm specifically not talking about some areas that might, because I want to see what people think about it. But there was an area where I neglected to use a weapon in a specific way, and I kid you not, I spent an hour and a half running around trying to figure out what's going on. Like, what is going on? What am I missing? Trying to beat this thing the absolute hardest way, and then I realized, I can use this to do that. Oh my god, I feel stupid.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing that I know. Certainly, we talk about it on the podcast of the type of gamers we are. We want to be making progress. We don't want to feel like we're wasting our precious little game time. And that is the kind of game where I am wary about Metroidvania games, because sometimes I feel like when they don't guide you through the experience and you find yourself with this huge map saying, I remember I saw something back like an hour ago. I don't remember where that was. I don't know that I could get back there. And I don't know that I have the will to wander for a while.
Exactly.
Other than just going to GameFAQs and finding exactly where I need to go next. I do wonder how much of that's just my own impatience spoiling the game for me. But I do I've learned at this point of my gaming life, I go with my gut a lot of times and say, well, if I'm not having fun doing that, then I just need to be honest with myself and just bite the bullet, move on, do what I need to do.
So what are you playing, Aaron?
So we'll talk a little bit more about the contrast to my gaming assignment this week. But I actually, even though still don't own a PS4, did buy another PS4 game.
Although they did say, the rumor is, through the leaked documents, that it's going to be the 11th or 13th of October.
Yeah, I think I'm in. So I think we do have a date certain by which I might be curing my problem.
This is a video and audio record of his statement saying he's going to actually buy
Sony,
one.
Sony, you deliver. I've got monies, so just give me the console. We can make this work. I did order Just Cause 3 this week. I think Just Cause 2 is one of the most underappreciated games ever released. I think it is the greatest open world game I have ever played. If you have not played this game, the best thing I can explain it with is you get a grappling hook and you get a parachute. And those two mechanics combined are absolute magic. I can't even explain. Like, it is just so much fun of jumping off a building, grappling, hooking yourself to the ground, and right before you get there, opening the parachute to pop you up in the air and give you some lift to get you out of danger. Once you master the mechanics, the stuff you can do in that game is unlike anything that Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead, like any of that stuff. Nothing delivers that feeling where you're just in total control of all of your interactions. So I bought that and looking forward to playing that in the near distant future. But actually played some fighting games with a friend. So I played, I don't even know how to pronounce this because this is, this is Axis at its best. The new Guilty Gear, I think it is Guilty Gear Xrd. But, right, this is a game. I did not play a lot of Guilty Gear growing up. I owned one of the versions. I think it may have been the original Guilty Gear back on the PS1 era. But it's a really exceptional fighting game. People who are into it are very much into it, both for the mechanics and the look and feel. This is a game where if you see kind of the cosplay pictures from all the big conventions, you will see Guilty Gear well represented because it has some very iconic characters. And I will tell you, I had an absolute blast playing this game. Axis, who is the developer, also you would know them for the BlazBlue series and the Persona fighting game series. Those games look so good, it is hard to put into words. I'm looking at the opening transitions that the fighters use to come in, and I just sat there like, wow, this system sells itself just on how good this all looks. The action is really sharp, the frame rate's great. I will say fighting games on this new generation, even compared to the PS3, where I felt like the graphical leap in performance relative to anything before was very noticeable. It is a huge leap in technology and what's possible. And even though I was not good at the game, I think that it was still very approachable, and the pace was good to where I felt like, even though my friend Richard was clearly better than me at the game and he had some experience and some history with the game, I felt like we kind of played where we sampled some characters, and I played a little bit of everybody, didn't kind of play the same character twice, found some ones that I clicked with and would enjoy going back and playing more, and I just had a really great time with it. And it reminded me, I think Axis does something with their fighting games that really helps, which is that they put decent story modes in all of their games. And I know for some fighting game players that almost sounds like heresy and a waste of time. But for somebody like me, and we'll get into this when we talk about my assignment for the week, it helps take a lot of the sting out of the fact that I'm not good at these games anymore, and let me focus on the fact that I'm making progress and I'm contributing because I'm advancing the storyline with my mediocre play skill. So I would highly recommend this game for those of you who still enjoy fighting games. Even though I think the genre has gotten to kind of a hardcore status, and that it certainly doesn't have the casual following that it used to, I think if you're willing to kind of take your lumps and say, I know I'm not going to be great at this game, and I may not ever put in the practice to be an elite player, and I can't go online or go to Evolution, I think this is a game that you could have some fun with. I think the visual style is very cool, the music's cool, and I think that once you get past all of the crazy terminology and the fact that you were playing a character named Saul Bad Guy, once you get past that, you'll have a great time.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I definitely want to play this as well. I also need to figure out how to actually pronounce it. So.
Yes, I can't help you there.
With that, let's go into the game assignments here. Aaron, you were playing Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. What did you think?
So I have a confession, Chris. I always want to keep it real with our listeners. I sat down to play Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I played the team that I said I would. I played a couple of matches, and immediately, you kind of play on noob mode where it's been a while. I played some new characters. I played, just for those of you who didn't listen to last week, I played as what is affectionately known as Team Zero May Cry, which is the lead character as you see it played by the top players. Zero is your lead character, Zero from the Mega Man series, followed up by the bros of Devil May Cry fame, Dante and Virgil. Actually, Virgil first, then Dante third. That is one of the elite teams, top tier, competitive. I really like both Mega Man and Devil May Cry, so I was like, okay, this is perfect.
Sounds good. Okay.
What I would say is, looking back on my experience with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, one of the big characters back then was Magneto, who, among the top tournament players, was one of the favorites. But I would describe him as a Ferrari, in that if you know how to drive a Ferrari, the performance that you can get out of that car is unlike what you can get out of a Honda Civic. But for the untrained person, they would probably rather have the Civic, because
you're going to stall the car.
Yeah, you're going to stall the car. If you just want to get point A to point B, the Civic's probably the car that you want. Zero was definitely that character to me. I mean, when you look at the combos that top players can pull off, he has an infinite combo that he can chain you in the corner, and just, once he gets you, if you're good enough to continue the combo, you can't escape. I am so far away from ever being able to execute even a portion of that combo that I just kind of laughed when I was playing the game. Now, I did have more both luck and fun playing as Virgil and Dante. I think Virgil is an awesome character. He is absolutely my play style of having kind of a combination of really effective zoning moves, but once you are able to close, they both have one of their big things is that they can activate the devil trigger, where they kind of turn into a powered up mode, and they move faster and they can execute different combos. And that part of both of them was a lot of fun, and I found myself a lot more able to do that. All in all, though, I found myself after a couple of matches saying, you know what, maybe I need to go online. Like, let me just watch a couple of matches. And then immediately the rest of the time that I had allocated to playing the game, I spent watching Evolution reruns.
Well, yeah.
This kind of tells me, what I found about the game is, compared to Guilty Gear or BlazBlue, this game is so much faster than even what I remember from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I mean, the on-screen action is just so much to keep up with, and you just feel like you can't play at the speed that the game is ready to play at, especially having the 3 characters on screen where you're not only trying to just kind of get the basic combos of your character that is on the screen, but you're also trying to figure out how that pairs up with the assists that you have available to you. It's an awesome game, and I love it, but it is just so much to take in if you're casual like I am.
Yeah.
So I really did enjoy watching Evolution. I saw some new characters. There was a guy who was playing Hawkeye that I will just put it out there. If you haven't watched Evolution from 2016, this guy's Hawkeye is unreal. I mean, literally, and the announcers knew it because they've seen this guy play. But they were basically like, this guy's Hawkeye is like unlike anybody else we've ever seen. And he gets down to where he's basically one shot away from death. It's his last character. And he goes into X Factor, which is basically you get so many seconds, depending on how many of your characters are dead, of like super powered, super strength. And he goes into X Factor and literally goes from being one shot away from death to clearing out the other guy's entire team.
I have to see
literally
this.
Doesn't take a hit.
Wow.
And I was just sitting there
That's
like,
crazy.
I will never be at this guy's level.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that somebody is this good and this consistent and able to, like at a high level of play, is able to combo somebody off so confidently. And just watching some of the new characters, there was a guy who had a Chun-Li that was unbelievable. I've never seen her played in competitive play. So all that to say, I think this is a game that I've kind of just said, I am going to be a spectator and a very, very casual player at best because I am just not good enough to play this game.
Yeah. Well, and I actually haven't played it before, so it'd be interesting to see. I played earlier iterations on it. I'm sure I'm well, as you'll see in my assignment, I'm just not. I'm as good as I used to be, which is to say I'm not very good.
So Chris, let's transition to that. You suited up with Gwilly, Dalsim, Ken, however you want to pronounce Guile's name, as we mentioned.
Gwilly or whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
You suited up with Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Tell us your experience taking a walk back down memory lane.
And actually, so I actually played 2 of them. I played Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and then I played the original Street Fighter 2 Turbo because I wanted to switch. Although the Super adds a couple more characters and all that. Actually, so first of all, let me just talk about Street Fighter 2 Turbo because actually the game I had a lot more experience with back when I first started, and probably I liked it better because it had the original characters, a cast of characters, and it also had like a Super Turbo mode with a cheat you can put in like 13 star. I don't know how many. You can, at the beginning of the game, you can actually add the number of stars you have. It will dictate how quickly the game plays, and you can actually get it to play extremely, insanely fast. And so, it was exactly as I expected it. I always play the game really, really, really fast. That's probably not surprising considering I'm, a speed runner. I like speed chess. I like speed, speedrunning Mario and other games, Super Metroid and all that. I also like my Street Fighter Turbo very, very, very fast. So picked out the crazy characters. I mentioned I played Guile. I played Guile a lot. I played a lot of Ken. And, I love that game. It really is. It's funny. You can look at where the games are today, where Street Fighter games are today, and they're certainly relatively balanced. I'd say people would argue they are pretty balanced. Even back then, I think the games were pretty much balanced. I really enjoyed playing them, and I played a whole bunch of characters. I listened to in all the glory to the 16-bit crazy voices like Japan,
Boom!
It's like it's so bad in how they say some of these things. And I also thoroughly enjoyed destroying people's cars, which is a key portion of all of it. Key portion of it. I spent some time going back and playing some characters I didn't normally play. Like E Honda has been one that I had always kind of not done so well with.
I'm terrible at Honda.
Yeah, Zangief is another one I decided, I got to come back and play him and see how good I am with him.
Can you still execute the spinning pile driver, Chris?
No. No.
Full circle, 360 degrees on the SNES pad too.
I can
That's
do well.
impossible.
I probably need to have a different kind of pad, like a joystick on it. And maybe I could do it, but look, I'm just not very good at the game. So, it was really fun. It brought back a lot of memories. I really loved that game. Street Fighter 2 and then the Turbo version were really what made fighting games back in the day, in my mind. You had Mortal Kombat that came out a little bit after that. They're all good games and into the Tekkens and all that stuff of the mid to like 90s, but really it all goes back to Street Fighter II Turbo. And when Super Street Fighter II Turbo came out, added some of the new characters, added a lot more, I guess, vivid graphics, made it look a lot nicer. Still too slow for my taste, necessarily, but I think they did a really good job. The Capcom has always done great at having beautiful fighters.
I would agree.
And, even at the beginning of Street Fighter II Turbo, or Street Fighter II, and certainly as it went into the Super Street Fighter kind of a range, they always looked amazing, and that's what I think they've done a great job with. Aside from making a game that is incredibly well planned out, well balanced, it's just overall a great game.
Excellent. So, with that, we'd love to hear your thoughts on these games. Both we had a fighting game genre type of a week. We would love to hear any other recommendations in the genre. Hear your experiences with these. What you think? You the business casual gamers audience. Are you having the case of just can't quite keep up with the games?
Mm-hmm.
You may be getting the old man hands of you can't execute the full circle. Whatever it is, we'd love to hear your experience.
As young as we used to be, right?
Yeah, right. So with that, we're going to get into our next week's game assignments, and here there's going to be kind of another theme, keeping with our earlier topic. Some games that kind of toe the line of, is this really a game? So, Chris, let me assign you the first one.
Okay.
I brought it over. This is a game that I bought that will probably, if I remember correctly, will probably take you 2 to 3 hours tops if you want to go all the way through.
Okay.
The game is Child of Eden. Now, this was released for both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It is brought to you by, I think it's Q Entertainment. They were the makers of Rez, of Lumines. So, very storied developer in the music genre of kind of, I'll call it the interactive music genre. And I would tell people who are interested in this game, the best way to figure out, aside from just watching a playthrough, to figure out whether you like this game is to go to YouTube, look up the video of the song Heavenly Star, which was written by Tetsuya Mizuguchi's his band. And if you like that song, I think you're probably going to like this game.
Okay.
If you don't like the song, there's something there, but I would tell you the musical genres on display here, it's kind of a blend of J-pop and electronic music. It's very cool. I think it much like in the way that Rez was at the time, the fact that you were effectively getting to play the music as you play the game. It is like Rez in the sense that it is a shooter, kind of a side-scrolling shooter. Well, I shouldn't say side-scrolling. It's more like a Star Fox type of game, right? Where you point the cursor at different things, and by you're painting the targets, and as you release them and hit the different targets, it plays the beats of the song and kind of fills in the blanks. And it's a gorgeous game. It's a lot of fun. There's 5 levels. You can get through it very quickly. But I really want to see kind of what your experience with this game is, because I think at the end of it, like I said, you can sit down and in a single playthrough as I did. This was a game that I'm very curious. I'm not going to tell you what the price was for the game on release, but I want to hear you report back to the audience of whether you like the game or not. For a person that you think might like the game, what would you charge for this game? I'm very curious because I think this is going to be a very telling follow-up to the game.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, we can do that. Well, and okay, so you have, I guess, a musical kind of a game for me. I have a kind of a musical game for you, and I don't know if you've played it before. I know you played a lot of Pixel Junk games, but I wanted to see, have you played Pixel Junk 4AM?
So this is the one that got away, Chris.
Okay, good.
Yes, and,
so this is gonna
part
be a good
of the
one
reason why is because I didn't know what the game was about. I read about it.
The description is so...
I didn't understand it.
I don't understand even knowing it and kind of I've not played it before, but knowing it and reading about it and seeing the title, I still don't know what it means. So go try it out and see what you think about it. I mean, I know it's a music video game. I know I remember people talking about how it does it actually can use the PlayStation Move, which I know you've been singing its praises certainly all episode. I think you probably want to go out and buy 2 or 3 moves just to make sure you're covered.
I mean,
in
it's
case
the only way I can play
wall.
Papers, Please VR, right?
Exactly. You got to
It'd be
get ready for
foolish
that
of me
VR.
not to get it now before the price spikes.
It's coming out soon. I'm going to email that developer after this. But yeah, check out Pixel Junk 4AM. See what you think about it. I definitely want to know your opinions. I also want to know if you do end up having to play with the Move, how it goes. Doesn't sound like you will. But.
Yeah, this is a game. I'm very curious about this game because I know the developer well, as you mentioned. I love the Pixel Junk games, and I saw this and I was so excited for their next game. And they actually haven't had another Pixel Junk branded game in a while, and I just don't know what it is, other than I know it has to do with music. So I will report back next week.
All right. So with that, we actually do have a news section and some interesting information with respect to the show for our news section, and something we wanted to talk about. So we have one of our core tenets of the things we have not done on this podcast is we wanted to make sure that all of our shows are kind of timeless in many ways. And while we talk about some games that we're playing, and those games may be things that just were released, we typically want you to be able to go back and listen to a show, arguably a year or 2 years in the past, and still get the same level of stuff out of it, right? Still get something out of it, still have it be relevant. And so with that, we've consciously tried to stay away from more news-related things, and sometimes we do talk about news. That's true. A couple of episodes we do that, but many cases we don't. And so what we thought about as an option, this is something we're going to submit to you as the consumers of this content, as the viewers and the listeners. Please let us know what you think about it. We want to start something, and we also want to get some more people interested in the YouTube side, people who listen to more of the podcast side, give them more of a reason with the retro reruns and some other stuff that's going to be announced at some point in the next couple months. We're going to give you on the YouTube channel for you to interact with, and more of a visual kind of a content. In this case, we have this news segment we're going to start trying out called BC News. So basically business casual news. And here's the goal. Here's how it's different from everyone else you're going to be listening to, all the other podcasts, all the other RSS feeds and all that. Because we're business casual gamers, you, Aaron, me, everyone, right? We don't have time for a lot of reading the articles. We don't have time to click on all the links. We don't really have time. What we want is really an executive summary of what happened in the news the last week. We also don't want it every week necessarily. We would rather have it when big things happen, when things are important that we think about. And so you guys have gotten to know us over the last 6-7 months now. You have a good feeling for what we think is important. Hopefully that jives really well with what you think is important. So here's what we want to deliver to you. We want to give you an under 5-minute executive summary of the most important things we've seen in the world of gaming over the last 7 days or so. We want to put it exclusively on the YouTube channel. We want to upload it periodically. I can't tell you we're going to do it every single week. That's okay, because I don't want to waste your time every single week. I don't want us to sit here and think we're going to have to come up with 3 or 4 things to tell you every week. That's wasting your time. It's wasting our time. What we want to do instead is, if things happened, we want to come in for a minute and a half and tell you about that one big thing that happened, or come in for 4.5 minutes and tell you about the 2 or 3 big things that happened, and that's it. We'll give you links to in the subscription, or in the description for places you can go if you want to go look at it. But realistically, you should be coming in, listening to it for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then be done and move on with it. I think it'll be a really cool way for us to connect with you guys to get the information you want and kind of get out on your time schedule. Yeah,
and I think that Chris mentioned the format. I think this is going to be a video format that we try some different things in terms of exactly how it looks, how it sounds, where we film, all that. We'll try some different things potentially there, but I think we do want to make it a quick video format that, like Chris said, doesn't waste your time, is respectful, that we can't do research projects all week. We want to hear about big things. So with that, we're going to spend just 5 minutes or less on a current news topic that Chris and I have been exchanging texts on, and that is the new Nintendo Mini NES. Now, it basically, for those of you who haven't seen it, it basically looks like a miniature Nintendo. Doesn't hold cartridges. It comes preloaded with a set number of games.
30 games.
Yeah, some good games, I will say.
Yeah.
But I will say, I want to hear your take on this as well, Chris. The first time I saw this story posted, I basically said, this is all the affirmation you ever need that Nintendo has no coherent online strategy. Because they would basically take everything, if you could even call it anything, that they've built up online, whether it be through the 3DS or through the Wii shop or whatever online portal it's been, and they basically take the best of all that content, they bundle it up, they throw it on a box, that you can't upgrade, you can't do anything with, and they say, hey, we're going to put something out there for the holidays or just to have something to sell.
Right.
Here it is. Here's all those Nintendo games you loved repackaged once again.
Yeah, okay. I have two opinions on this. Two different sides of the coin. One side of the coin, I actually have a coworker who has some young children, 7 to 9 years old, and he has come to me periodically, knowing that I'm a game collector, saying, hey, do you have an NES for me? How do I find a good NES? How do I make sure it's reliable? I want to get my kids involved in old school retro games. And I've been trying to help him out before this actually happened. The day this actually happened, he actually sent it to me and said, hey, have you seen this? I'm going to buy this. This is awesome. For that kind of a buyer, for someone who is not, play some games, but not really I don't think they consider themselves a gamer or even a hardcore gamer, certainly wanting to get people involved in retro kind of a gaming scene and want to do it relatively inexpensively. It's $60,
right.
Plus $10 for controllers or whatever. I think that's a good idea. I do think that's a good idea. But that said, Nintendo really missed the mark here in my mind. And this is everything we've been saying about Nintendo, everything everyone else has been saying about Nintendo for the last 30 years is coming true. This is the very definition of Nintendo, an example of Nintendo being tone deaf to the overall scenario. Think of the options. You're right. Online option would be so easy to do. Heck, you could put a Raspberry Pi in and make it play Nintendo and put it online, and you could give it some upgradability. You could put SD cards in it if you really want to be old school and do the same thing. You could do so many things that could help expand an already, you look at the price of these Nintendo games, and a lot of the good ones are 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks still. That's not necessarily an indication of rarity in most cases. Most cases because the game is really good, and even though it's an uncommon game, or it's sometimes common, you still can't, it's hard to come by in some cases. This would be the perfect opportunity for them to touch base with a brand new market and give the upgradability and show that they care. But again, much like everything else, Nintendo's stubbornness, this is the way we're going to force feed what we want to you down your throat and beyond, and you're going to like what you're going to get because we're Nintendo, period.
And this is where, to me, the arrogance comes in, because if you look at, go back, way back when the music download scene with Napster started, the reality is, you can go get every Nintendo game downloadable right now in 5 seconds for free. It is called an emulator, and there are ROMs for every NES game online that you can find in 5 seconds, and you could have the entire back catalog for free. Now, I'm not saying that is a legal approach to it, but if I'm looking to get an NES experience, and your coworker that you mentioned, I could absolutely point somebody in the direction to say, hey, play every NES game. And if you go and get a controller that kind of has a 2-button input and a D-pad, you're good to go. And the fact that Nintendo is so tone deaf, and that they would say, well, that's illegal. You can't do that. Well, guess what? People are doing it, and they've been doing it for years. If you can't give them an experience that's on par with the simplicity of that, they're not going to give you money. Now, I think this will sell because there is a lot of nostalgia, and I think people, there is a number of people who want to do the right thing, and they want to pay for it. But I just look at this and say, what a missed opportunity.
Just go buy an NES.
It's insane. Really. But like you said, it is Nintendo doing Nintendo things. I think this will sell well. And they released some very good games on this. They didn't go cheap in terms of giving you like one good game and saying, I'm going to give you 30 games, but most of them are garbage. They gave you the good stuff for the most part. And I appreciate them doing that. But the reality of it is, this is kind of a flash in the pan thing. And then are you going to sell me another box when you want to sell me the next 30 games? It's just stupid. And I think Nintendo, this is a decision you make when you're trying to make quarterly earnings and you don't have enough time to actually make a thoughtful decision of how do I want to approach respecting my back catalog and selling this to people for generations to come. I just don't think they know what they're doing in this area.
Yeah, and I don't want to be ungrateful. I'm glad that they're doing it in many ways because I think it's going to serve some areas of the market that are unserved right now. The people, like I mentioned, my coworker that just wouldn't, it was really scared about going out and buying an NES because it wouldn't work and he'd had to clip a pen to help keep the thing from pink screening or whatever. I get all that, but I also think that it's a super missed opportunity, and it really does. Unlike anything else, you're right. This made me feel like, if you think about in the early NES days when Nintendo was setting hard caps to the number of games each developer or each producer or production company could put out for the NES. We think about back in we talked about the Famicom Disk System. When they were out, every time someone would publish a game or put a game out on the FDS, Nintendo had to have like some sort of 50% or something ludicrous on it. Like they put these stupid stipulations on things that end up killing half of the viability of their product, and we've continued to see this. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's the people at the top. Someone in that company needs to be smacked upside the head, because that is not the right way to do this, and they're missing out big time on it. I don't know. I hope that, like I said, I may actually buy one, because I think they are kind of interesting and neat, and it'd be cool to see something that my friends could play and things like that. But in the end, it's a missed opportunity.
Thanks, Nintendo. So with that, we are bringing our ungrateful episode 15 to a close. Would love to hear your thoughts about the games we've talked about. Certainly hear your feedback on the news segment that we talked about. Any ideas for that? So with that, we're going to bring episode 15 to a close. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks all.